Hello, in this episode, I interviewed Russell Marcos from Hampton College in Clinton, New York. We talked about how to make the class more playful, the benefits of a playful class, and all the games Russell has used in his own teaching. Russell is the director of the Hampton Summer School program in philosophy, which is just a fantastic summer school. Of course, we talked about that as well. If you're interested in playfulness, teaching, and philosophy, I am sure you enjoy listening to this interview. Just a quick announcement. There was a problem with my audio, so I had to record my voice again.
So I'm Russell Marcus. I'm professor of philosophy and chair of philosophy at Hamilton College, which is a small liberal arts college in central New York. And I'm also the founder and director of the Hamilton College Summer Program in Philosophy, which is a kind of laboratory for innovation in pedagogy and philosophical pedagogy. We have a 2-week program every summer in which we try to uh, provide a platform for philosophy instructors to try new things in their teaching. And we get some great students, about 20 students, to come in and be like lab rats for these experiments. And then we try to disseminate the work and maybe help improve philosophy teaching.
What were the games you used?
I haven't started my teaching career as using games. It's something I've come to in large part by talking to other people and getting inspired from other work of others. So in my own teaching, I do a few things that are very much game related, or game inspired, or anyway fun. I'm not sure, with apologies to Wittgenstein, I'm not sure what a game is, and what the necessary and sufficient conditions are for gaming. But philosophy is fun. And, we're working with others often, right? And that collaborative aspect can be a lot of fun. And we're asking puzzling questions and we're like running up against like assumptions that we've had for a long time. And that can be unnerving, but it can also be fun. So I do think in general, I'm looking to have fun classrooms, and I think games can contribute to that, but there are other ways to have fun in a classroom that maybe we wouldn't quite classify as games, but are inspired by thinking about the way games work. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. So I'll start with something very clear in my own work, that I tried after working with Ashley Pryor from the University of Toledo in the summer program last summer. And she is a philosophy instructor and an improv comedian and satire writer. And she proposed a course for our program, our summer program, on philosophy and comedy. And her course was amazing. It was great. And she had the kids doing, lots of different improv activities. Largely, they were just having fun in class. They were thinking about theories of comedy. They're looking at Aristotle and Hobbes, but they were also like just doing comedy and producing satire. And I looked at that stuff and I said, well, that's fun for like a summer program, but for like my own courses where I have, serious expectations for philosophical progress, right? Like, how do I integrate those? So I found a few that I really liked. One was just like an introduction in class, like to get students to know each other. So it was a game they called Names and Gestures, actually called it Names and Gestures. I think that's a typical name in the improv world. And it's just you stand in a circle and you have like a soft object, like a plush toy that you throw to the next person. You say a name and then you make a gesture, like whatever gesture, you make up a gesture. So I would do like this, like a philosopher, but other people did like dance moves or whatever, just a simple gesture, and then you throw the ball to the next person or the plush toy, and then they have to recite all the people who've come before and do their gesture, right? And so you're just going around in the circle or whatever, not in the circle, you ping pong through the group until everybody gets to know each other. And what this does in a class is it introduces ourselves and it like creates a kind of friendly atmosphere that allows us then when we get to discussing deeper and more difficult philosophical issues that we're already familiar with each other. One of the problems in philosophy classes getting students to engage, especially at the early levels, is to kind of lower that barrier to entry. And they're worried about social, like, what is going to look like if I say this thing? I'm not really sure that I'm saying the right thing. Is somebody going to judge me? And so just lowering that barrier and getting people friendly and familiar in kind of a fun way can have, if not direct philosophical ramifications, but it does have like building community kinds of stuff that I think is really helpful in a philosophy classroom. So that was one. We did the names and gestures one. Another one that I took from her improv course was, and I used last semester, was a a game called Objections. It's essentially like you're in a courtroom, and everybody is a lawyer in the courtroom, and you can do this with like a selection of students, like 5 students, and then you just put a topic on the table, and you pick arbitrarily someone to just start riffing. This is improv, right? Just riffing on the topic, and then the other panelists, the other lawyers, at any point can raise their hand and go, objection. And then they say something, maybe hopefully responding to something that the lawyer on the stand has already said. You need a judge. So as instructor, I would be the judge. And the judge can either say objection sustained, in which case the person who made the objection now is the lead, and then they're just riffing on the topic. And then, or you can say objection overruled, and the person who was speaking continues to speak. So this is kind of fun. You could do it for a while, and you say like, well, whoever's done after some arbitrary time. And what I learned is you can't tell them 3 minutes, because then they just strategize to like be on the stand at 3 minutes. But anyway, the person at some arbitrary time wins the game. So it's a competitive game. But so that was super fun, and actually ended up being philosophically productive, because you start them just to get them to learn the rules of the game. You start them with something silly, like one of the dining halls on campus, right? So the topic will be socks or whatever, right? Like something just to get them to learn the rules. But then you can go to something like, I was teaching a philosophy of ed class. So I was like grading or tracking in education, right? And so now they're like thinking about core topics, and you could do this in any class. Like, what are the core topics once they've discussed empiricism, like the hard problem of consciousness, whatever. You could do whatever topic you want once they have some experience, and it forces them away from the slow thinking that we often do in philosophy into something more creative and idea generating. And so like that was super fun. And also once we got into the philosophy stuff, I mean, initially they froze a little bit, like, how do I do this? And then they, quickly they're like, oh, we're just doing the same kind of thing as the silly thing. We're just riffing. There's no judgment. It's not about grades, right? And it loosens them up to do the creative kind of listening to other perspectives and hearing a variety of views. And it's very important in objections that they listen to each other, right? And that's another skill that is super important in a philosophy classroom, to hear each other, right? So I'll tell you one more of these, and then I want to tell you about something else. So the other one that I really liked that I picked up from the improv stuff this summer was called Dr. Know-It-All. And here, again, you have like 5 panelists, and they are like a homunculus-headed creature called Dr. Know-It-All. And so you ask Dr. Know-It-All a question, and then Dr. Know-It-All has to respond by the 5 people, each gets to say one word at a time. And so they produce a sentence or two answer collaboratively, right? So each person, so you've got the 5-person Dr. Know-It-All, and each one gets one word. So they have to like riff off of, okay, what are the words that came before me? I get to add one word, and then the next word comes up. Um, and this is something that again forces listening, encourages listening skills and collaboration skills, which are two those are two kinds of uh, skills that I want to foster in a philosophy classroom. So, um, and all of these again are about reducing barriers to entry into class participation, and that's partly just from like, well, we want people to talk in class, right? But it's also largely from perspectives of equity and inclusion, that right, that everyone really needs to feel empowered to participate in the conversation. And so I want to make sure that they're comfortable with each other and they understand how to collaborate. So those are some things I've done in my own teaching.
I think that many students are very shy. Well, in normal classes, they tend to be very silent. In my own experience teaching, it is so hard to get them to talk. It's like students were hardwired to be silent. I don't know, maybe that's how they've been trained in schools. And I really like this idea of philosophy being something social. I mean, consider Plato, right? He wrote dialogues.
Exactly. And I think that we have this weird, it's unclear where this myth of the isolated, independent philosopher comes from. But I mean, look at the history of our discipline. I mean, you think about Descartes meditating in the room by himself, but look, when he publishes the Meditations, it's this little pamphlet about his own thoughts, and then this huge objections and replies, and like all of the correspondence that's so important to understanding his work. All the philosophers it is essentially a social activity, because, and this is how I talk about it with my students, maybe this is useful to say, but like, the thing about philosophy is we're asking hard questions that we don't know the answers to, and it's essential to doing good philosophy to hear perspectives that aren't our own, because we only have our own isolated narrow perspective, and when you're asking these difficult questions you need a variety of perspectives. So any kind of pedagogy which fosters this like independent great solitary thinker is just like so misleading about what philosophy is, and also about where philosophy is fun, because what's fun about philosophy is working with a bunch of like-minded people on difficult problems. Like for me, that's when it gets like good, right? The sitting alone, I don't know.
I imagine some groups of students might not feel so comfortable playing these games. Has this ever happened to you, of some students feeling uncomfortable with playing one of these activities?
So in a way, I want to talk about some other stuff I do, which is inspired by games, to answer that question, because I think that it's important to support those students who have been trained to be isolated, and to think about like why they're more comfortable in something which is so boring as just listening to somebody talk for 75 minutes or whatever it is, right? Like that's, it's hard to, especially when you're, I mean, for those of us who have some experience in philosophy, or we're deeply entrenched in the concepts and ideas, we can go to a lecture and have like and get something out of it. But for like our students who are just being exposed to philosophy first time, they don't have that stamina to like engage, to listen to a lecture. I mean, maybe you've got some really engaging lecturers, and they do magic tricks or something. But human attention spans are short, right? So why would a student want to just sit there and be lectured at and then just go and work by them? Like, you have to sort of think about that, given how, yeah, sure, there are shy people, but the joy of philosophy is really working with other people. And the problem is that I think some students, they have been socialized to lose trust in each other, right? And that to see the dangers in these social situations, right? And so the trick is to create a context in which students feel comfortable with each other. And so how do you do that? Because there's so many social things that you don't have control over as a teacher. But so I teach using a lot of what's called team-based learning. And that's a set of like complex, integrated pedagogical structures that's more complicated than we need to talk about here. But essentially, what I do in class is students do a lot of small group activities, and they're in the same small groups over an entire term. And so I'll do a little framing at the beginning of class, and then I'm like, okay, here, do this activity. And then they do it for a little while, and then we come back in, we talk a little bit about it, but then I give them other activities. And largely what we're doing in class is they're working in small groups on activities that I design in order to scaffold or support good conversation, like useful conversation. I learned this from TBL from a philosopher named Kimberly Van Orman, who's now at University of Georgia. She's my like TBL guru. But there's a bunch of people who've developed this style of learning. Larry Michelson is an important name in the team-based learning literature, and Michael Sweet is another one who does a lot of this. But there aren't a lot of people using it in philosophy. It's used a lot in med schools and business schools. But I've been doing a lot of work adapting it in philosophy. Okay, so when I have the students working in teams, um, they I'm imagining these on the model of what we call trivia night on Hamilton campus or pub quizzes. So what happens ideally when you're at like one of these pub quizzes is that a question gets asked and nobody knows the answer, and you're totally stumped. And then someone will say something like, well, maybe let's think about this. And then someone else is like, no, that's not quite right. But what about this? And then you start pinging ideas off of each other, right? Oh, that makes me think of this, and and in the ideal situation, this is what's thrilling for me when I go to like a trivia night, right? Like, if we can reach this moment where like none of us have any idea, and then we're pinging ideas off of each other, and finally we get to it, and we get the right answer. That's like a thrilling moment, right? Okay, that's a great dynamic to adapt for a philosophy class. And that's what team-based learning is, right? I'm thinking about like, I'm going to give them some tough questions, and they're not going to be able to answer those questions. Like, I'll give them a quote, and I'll give them 5 different interpretations of like a key quote in the reading. And I'll give them 5 different interpretations, ones that I know are like more or less justifiable, but some really good ones. And they don't know which one to pick because they've never thought deeply about this quote before, about this question before. And by giving them different interpretations, I'll label them. It looks like a multiple choice quiz, but it is, but it's not like a typical multiple choice quiz where there's one right answer. There are lots of good answers and for different reasons. And so the teams, just like in a pub night, one says, well, I said A, and the other one says, I said B. And then they're starting to talk about, why did you say A? Why did you say B? And now we're in the space of reasons. Now we're doing philosophy. But the structure of it's just like that pub quiz, right? It's like, I thought of this, and then I'm thinking of this, and they're asking each other why. Because in the end, they're going to have to choose one of those interpretations and tell the class which one they chose. So they're not graded activities. They're just like, they're just opportunities for conversation. And there's lots of different, not just quote interpretation, there are lots of different kinds of activities that I can give them. Okay, so this is all about your question about how do you deal with like the shy or reticent student. By having them in teams over the course of the term, what they do is they build up relationships with each other, like how to work with each other, right? And they know that there's like the quiet, smart one who doesn't like say anything because they're worried, right? And they know that like they have to draw that person out because that person has something really good to contribute. And they know they've got the big mouth, the one that you were talking about before, the one who feels like totally comfortable in any philosophy space, just spouting off. And they know they've got to quiet that person down and like, we've got to hear from other people, right? Because they're building these structures over time. And there are ways to help them build those structures. So one thing I do is I have them do peer review. This is an essential element of team-based learning. You have peer review. I do it 3 times during the semester, and they give each other anonymous feedback, and they have grades based on that. So they know that they're responsible for each other. And there are graded activities that they do in teams. So they learn that they have to, like, who is the most trustworthy and who is less, and who they've got to draw out. And over time, it doesn't happen immediately. Well, sometimes it happens immediately, but for some teams, it doesn't really happen immediately. But over a few weeks of working together, they learn to trust each other, and they learn that they need to hear from each other. And that's what draws out the shy student. That's what brings the reticent student into, right? Because they know that no one's gonna jump down their throat, or no one's gonna judge them for that, right? That their participation is needed. And again, this is equity and inclusion, right, at its root. It's about like making sure that the space is one that everyone feels empowered to take part in. So there are these structures about like building in encouragements, because you can't just, if you just say go do work in groups, you're going to have exactly the problem you're talking about. And in terms of the improv stuff, right, when I do the objections task, an objections activity, right, we always start with fun stuff, right? That like I said, a dining hall, or like the weather here in Clinton, where I live, it's snowy and cold a lot of the year, right? So start with like weather in Clinton, New York, and everybody's got an opinion about that, and that lowers the right. They don't have to feel anxious about the philosophy stuff. And once they've built the structures, built the pathways, they know how to walk those paths.
It seems like students are trained in schools to be shy, to be afraid of talking, to speak their mind. So we can't change them overnight, right? It takes time.
Yeah, exactly. We have to do so much deprogramming of the hidden curriculum, we like to call it, right? That like, what are the norms and expectations for participation and engagement, and who gets rewarded and who doesn't? And so there's so much cleaning that slate and just assuring them that they are, that this is a welcoming space for them. It's not easy. And yeah, it does not happen overnight. You can't just like, snap your fingers and say, trust me. Like, like trust doesn't get, that's not how trust works, right? But they have to trust that they're safe in that space to use their voices, and that there won't be ramifications and like judgments and, problems that they're afraid of, right? So, I mean, there are surely other kinds of factors other than fear of judgment from peers that are relevant to whether a student is going to participate comfortably or not. But I think that's the major one, judgment from peers and instructors.
How do you structure your course? Is it a bit of lectures and a bit of games, or is it games all the way through? How is it?
So here's something I learned from Ann Cahill, who's a professor at Elon University in North Carolina. She said to me, and she taught at our summer program, and this is where I learned this. She's like, when I lecture, I want them to want me to lecture, right? I want them sitting on their edge of the seats, listening very carefully, right? Right, because if I'm going to be talking, right, I don't want to talk to people who don't care or thinking about other things. I want their attention. So how do I get them to be attentive, right? That's the question. And you don't get them to be attentive by walking in and saying, I'm a genius and listen to my words, right? That's not going to create attention, right? I mean, it will from some students. There are going to be a few students who are like, I really want to hear from the master, right? But like, that's not a typical approach from undergraduate students, right? So this is why the activities, right, having them do activities in groups, asking them difficult questions that are within their abilities as groups to do, but like that are right, and then and then they don't know what the right answer is, right? It's not right. So in an ethical, right, if we're talking about teaching ethics, right, you ask them a really serious ethical question that it's not obvious what the right answer is. I don't know. I mean, trolleys, is it right? Is it obvious what the right answer to a trolley case is? I mean, it's kind of a fun toy. There are issues with trolley kinds of discussions, but like, you can make those kinds of questions complex, and you can ask more real world kinds of questions, right, that are even more difficult to answer. Well, they talk about it amongst themselves, and so the first thing they have to do is reflect on what do they want to do as individuals. So everybody has a view. And then they have a conversation and they're asking each other why. And they're like coming to some sort of consensus. That's what I talk a lot about, consensus building in my class. Like, how do you build consensus? And then we come to whole class conversation, and that's my turn. And now they're going to see, like, I'll have maybe 6 groups in my class, 6 teams. Some chose A, some chose B, some chose C. Now they want to hear from me, right? Now they're on the edge of their seats, right? Because they've they've made a sort of decision about themselves, and then they've had a conversation with a group, and so they're comfortable that their decision's not crazy, or they've given up that one, or like, their anxiety levels lowered, right? They've built some confidence in having this conversation, but now they want to hear, right? Because now they want to know, like, did I get a good answer? Did I get not? What does he have to say about it? And at that point, I've got them, right? And I've got them only for a few minutes. And so I'm lecturing at that point for only a few minutes, and only if they want to, right? I mean, if everybody's in agreement, maybe I've made an activity and everybody's kind of in agreement about it. Maybe I've made the activity badly, or maybe I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about some concept. Then there's nothing to talk about. They've already had the conversation. Then I don't, right? So it's a kind of pedagogy that's only available to an instructor who feels comfortable, like, being flexible. Like, you gotta be ready to, like, lecture. You don't know where the questions are going to come. You don't know when the opportunity for lecture is going to be. It's not like I prepare my lecture notes and these are the things I want to say. That's not useful to the students. What you want is, what are the things they want to know, right? So you have to be ready to talk to them about what they want to know. At that point, they have ownership of the classroom, and it's like, and then they want to hear you.
But what if the students all agree? What if consensus is reached too fast? Do you work as an advocate for the other positions? Do you try to disrupt the consensus?
That's right. That's right. I will often give them a choice. Like, if I'm doing a quote interpretation, I'll give some ones that are pretty obvious, and then I'll give one that I think is right but is non-obvious. And so they'll all be like centering around A and B, and I'm like, I think the right answer is E. And at that point, they just like, what? That doesn't right? Because they've thought about it, they've had these conversations, and then they're really like, all right, you have to be careful, because you don't want to tell them, hey, everything you did is wrong, because that can be demoralizing, right? So you have got to be careful about how you present it in a way that's like inspires them to think creatively, but doesn't give them the impression that they're too stupid to do so.
So, can you tell us about the Hamilton Summer School program in philosophy? It is really nice. So, can you tell us a bit about it?
We did Reacting to the Past one time at the summer program, and that was super fun. The problem with Reacting to the Past, and I got to participate in that, and what's amazing about the Reacting to the Past uh, is scenarios, is that every student is assigned a character, right? And you're reenacting whatever historical scenario. And when you put people in character, it just gives them that that ownership of the space, right? It makes them feel like they're in it. And so they're writing from, right, when they write, they have to do some writing activities along. Well, there are different ways to do it, but typically students will write, and they'll write sort of as character. And so it just puts them into their writing in a way that typical philosophical writing is often more detached, and it's so productive. I do something that's not a Reacting to the Past assignment, but it's similar. So I'll have students write a letter to a philosopher, right? And they have to write like a personal letter to one of the philosophers we're reading. And it does the same kind of thing that Reacting to the Past does. It like personalizes, right? So they're like, "Dear Bishop Barclay," or "Dear George," right? And it's just a little trick that really gets students involved. So I love that. I love doing that. The problem with Reacting to the Past scenarios, the main problem from my perspective, is that those scenarios are typically historical rather than philosophical. And so I'd love to see, and maybe, someday, maybe when I retire, right? Like, I'll have time to write one that really is philosophic philosophical at its root. Like even that democracy in Athens, where they end up doing the trial of Socrates again, right? That's kind of on the side. It's not the main idea. It's the main idea is about reestablishing Athenian democracy after the Peloponnesian War, I think it is. So it's tricky. It's really historical. So but it's super fun and productive, and I mean I love it. I would like to see more philosophical scenarios there. This summer at the Hamilton College Summer Program Philosophy, this is going to be so exciting. We've got Rebecca Leiby from University of Baltimore is going to be teaching a class on Hobbesian politics, but she's doing it on Minecraft, right? And that is so perfect. I'm super excited to see what she's going to do with that. I had I had some students in my philosophy education class last semester. I have them design a school, and they do these in teams as well. Um, and one of the teams in designing their school, one of the aspects I asked them to design the physical space, and they did it on Minecraft. So they designed in Minecraft the school. And so when they were presenting to the rest of the class their school, we got on the Minecraft and we could walk around the school and see like, oh, here's we have the lounge, and here's we have like the what we wanted the classrooms to look like, and the surrounding community. And it wasn't playing games, but it was using this game platform to that was, I mean, the students, felt very comfortable and natural. And then we could ask some real questions about like, what are the power structures you're designing into these physical spaces, right? What are the messages about authority and knowledge that you're integrating by building that platform that way? I'll say we haven't had one of these classes yet. There's a woman, I sent you her name, Rebecca Scott at Harper College. And
Yeah, I interviewed her as well.
oh, great. I've learned so much. She's just like a creativity machine. I am not a very creative person. I come to these things sort of slowly and laboriously. I'm more of a logic guy, right? I do logic and philosophy and math. I'm like careful, right? But my, but I was at a talk of hers where she had us designing a philosophy game. And it was like, okay, how are you going to design a philosophy game? Like, and then she has the students do that kind of thing, and they have to use annotations from the readings that they're doing. They have to have the game informed by the philosophy they're doing, and instead of having them write a paper, have them design a game. It draws on like the same kinds of skills, like what are the core concepts, what are the evidence for the core concepts, what are the reasons, right? But you can do that in different ways. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily do that in a senior seminar in my context, but at an introductory level, right? Getting people involved and trying to again lower the barrier of entry, using their creativity, and who knows, maybe even at an upper level, it can be useful as well. Yeah, she'll be better. So she had us doing sculptures and artwork, like all.
I know that in this summer there will be a course on Hobbes using Minecraft, right?
Yeah, end of June, beginning of July, we'll have 2 weeks of that. And we also have James Garrison from Baldwin Wallace University, and he's going to be doing language, games, and logic. And so he's going to be teaching Wittgenstein for these 2 weeks. But he's got these crazy games, which I don't want to talk about because I think he's going to sort of unfold them for the students in a way. But he's got a bunch of really interesting games to play that are going to be helping us to think about how we learn language. So he's taking that phrase language game, not in maybe it's sort of in the way Wittgenstein meant it, but also I think in a playful way to think, okay, let's play some games with language. So so I'm looking forward to that this summer. It should be a fun summer. We have 20 slots for students, but 10 of them are reserved for Hamilton College students because that's where our funding comes from. Everybody in the program is funded, so everybody gets a generous stipend, travel, and room and board while they're here. We are very grateful to the Truex Fund for Philosophy at Hamilton College to to help support this program. And so yeah, so there are 10 slots, and we've had people from all over the country and world. I mean, we've had students from lots of different countries apply and sometimes are admitted. So it can be competitive, but it's a fun and productive summer. It's very different from other kinds of summer institutes. There are a lot of summer institutes in the United States for helping to diversify the discipline, and those are great. And they typically, the summer institutes are like, here we're going to do like a a baby version of what it's like to be in grad school, and that's not what we're doing. We're doing like, let's find interesting ways to teach and learn philosophy. Yeah, it's just ideal circumstances. The weather here is nice over the summer, and anyway, we the way we work it is we send out a call usually early summer to we solicit proposals. You want to do something interesting for 2 weeks, something new and innovative that you'd like to try in your classes, but maybe seems a little too out there to like right away start like. And so we've been, our numbers of applications have varied, but we always have at least, you know, well, we have a lot of applications, and some of them aren't really innovative. We get some applications for people who aren't really trying to do innovative, creative, pedagogical things. But we do get a lot of really cool stuff, and we haven't been able to include all of it, but we're excited. You know, we always get enough to do a great program. So
Thank you very much, Russell. Thank you so much. What you said about building trust and making the class more playful is very, very interesting. I guess if there's anything else you'd like to say.
let's see. I mean, I took some notes when you sent those questions. I'm just looking over them. I mean, there are you raised this question about whether games can be a barrier because students have to learn to play the game, and I do think that that's a really important question. And so I'm always looking for simple games that are easy to get into. But Rebecca's using Dungeons and Dragons, like that's complicated, right? So I think it can be done. Yeah, I mean, I yeah, there's more. Listen, I can talk forever about fun in the classroom, games in the classroom, but I think we've hit the main points. So I appreciate the opportunity. I'm always happy to talk about teaching. So thank you, Jonas.